The emergency klaxon screamed through the cramped cockpit, a relentless, piercing wail that vibrated in Kaelen's bones. Red light washed over his weathered face, glinting in the cold sweat beading on his temple. Outside the reinforced viewport, the infinite black was broken only by the jagged, spinning rock of the asteroid field, a silent graveyard of stone and ice. His gnarled hands, scarred from decades of hard labor, tightened on the ship's shuddering control yoke. Every muscle in his arms strained as he fought to keep the Orion's venture from being dashed against a mountain-sized chunk of iron and nickel tumbling lazily past. A shower of sparks erupted from a cracked console to his right, and the acrid smell of burnt wiring filled the recycled air. He didn't need to look at the frantic diagnostics flashing across the main screen to know it was bad. Life support was failing. Structural integrity was bleeding away into the vacuum. He turned his head just enough to see the young woman strapped into the co-pilot's seat, her knuckles white as she gripped her own console, her eyes wide with a fear he remembered feeling a lifetime ago. His voice was a low, gravelly whisper, barely audible over the chaos, but it carried the weight of a terrible truth. They said the vein of sorrows was cursed. I should have listened. A proximity alert shrieked, and the entire ship groaned in protest as he slammed the thrusters, veering hard to port, the dark shape of something immense and impossibly ancient sliding into view just beyond the spinning rocks. The ship shuddered one last time, a dying beast falling still as the klaxons cut out abruptly, plunging the cockpit into an eerie, red-lit silence. The only sound was the ragged rhythm of their own breathing. They were alive, but the venture was a tomb, her systems dark and cold. Kaelen unclipped his harness with stiff, aching fingers, his movements those of a man operating on pure instinct. Life support's on backup. We don't have long, he grunted, his voice hoarse. Their ship the Hope, it's our only chance. Its docking umbilical might still hold. Lyra nodded, her face pale but set with a determined resolve that surprised him. She was a data runner, not a miner, but she wasn't breaking, not yet. They moved through the crumpled airlock and into the chilling darkness of the derelict wreckage of Hope. Their helmet lamps cut narrow beams through the oppressive black, illuminating a scene of frozen horror. Dust motes danced in the light like tiny ghosts, and the air was stale, tasting of metal and decay. Crew members floated in the zero gravity, encased in a glittering layer of frost, their faces locked in final, silent screams. Tools and personal effects drifted lazily in the corridors, a macabre ballet of interrupted lives. Lyra's hand went to her mouth, her breath fogging her visor. Kaelen just pressed on, his jaw tight. He'd seen death in the black before, but never like this. They found the ship's main log terminal in a small operations room, its screen spider webbed with cracks but still faintly powered. Lyra's fingers flew across the frozen console, her expertise momentarily pushing back the fear. The logs, they're all corrupted, scrambled into nonsense. It's like something wiped the drives clean. Her voice was a frustrated whisper, then one file, marked with a final emergency tag, flickered to life. A man's face, gaunt and terrified, his eyes wide with a madness that the video compression couldn't hide, filled the screen. His voice was a raw, broken thing. The ore, we shouldn't have taken it on board. It's in the ore, it whispers. It shows you things you can't forget. Don't listen. The transmission dissolved into static. A cold dread, deeper than the void outside, settled in Kaelen's gut. He knew then, this wasn't a malfunction, it wasn't pirates, it was the rock, the cursed vein. Following a trail of emergency markers, they pushed further into the heart of the ship, into a sealed laboratory. The door hissed open reluctantly, and the sight within made them both freeze. In the center of the room, held in a magnetic containment field that flickered weakly, was a mineral sample unlike anything Kaelen had mined in 40 years. It was a jagged shard of obsidian black, veined with filaments of deep, bloody crimson that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic light like a sleeping heart. It cast long, dancing shadows across the walls, a hypnotic, terrible beacon in the dark. Lyra, drawn by a morbid fascination, took a step closer, her gloved hand outstretched. "It's beautiful," she murmured, her voice dreamy and distant. The crimson pulse within the ore quickened, its glow intensifying, washing over her face, and for a terrifying second, Kaelen saw her expression soften, a faint, empty smile touching her lips. The whispering wasn't a sound you heard with your ears. It was a pressure in the mind, a promise of secrets and peace. He lunged, his own will fighting against the seductive pull of the thing, and his hand closed around her arm, yanking her backward just as the containment field gave a final, sputtering cough and died. The ore hung in the air, now completely free, its pulsing light becoming frantic, hungry. And at that exact moment, with a deep groan of surrendering machinery, the Hope's artificial gravity failed completely, plunging them both into a weightless, silent struggle against an enemy they could not see. Weightless and disoriented, they tumbled in the oppressive silence, the only light coming from the malevolent, rhythmic thrum of the free-floating ore. Its whispers were a physical pressure now, a psychic static that clawed at the edges of Kaelen's mind, offering visions of a deep, dreamless sleep. He fought it, focusing on the cold, hard reality of the mining laser strapped to his thigh. A soft, scraping sound echoed from the corridor ahead, a sound that had no place in the vacuum-sealed halls of a dead ship. It was the sound of crystal grating against metal. A figure drifted into the beam of his helmet lamp, and Lyra let out a choked gasp. It was humanoid, but only just. It looked like a man who had been encased in a suit of jagged, translucent quartz, with thick, violet-hued crystals erupting from its back and limbs. Its face was a nightmarish mask, the features of the crewman from the emergency log recognizable only as a horrifying fossil trapped within the growing geode of its skull. One crystalline arm ended not in a hand but in a vicious spear-like point. It moved with an uncanny, drifting grace, pushing off a bulkhead with a soft tink. Its mouth, a dark fissure in the stone, did not move, but a voice echoed inside their heads, a grotesque distortion layered over the desperate tones they had just heard on the log. "The harvest is all. Join the chorus. Your form will be perfected, eternal." Kaelen didn't hesitate. Years of instinct took over. He shoved Lyra toward a side conduit, his own body spinning in the zero-G. His hand found the weight of the mining laser, a heavy, brutal tool designed to vaporize rock. He brought it up, the barrel glowing a fierce, angry red as it powered. The crystalline entity reached for him, that spear point arm moving with terrifying speed. Kaelen fired. A searing beam of concentrated energy lanced through the darkness, striking the creature square in the chest. The sound was not of flesh, but of superheated silica, a sharp, explosive crack that reverberated through the deck plates. The thing shattered into 1,000 glittering fragments, exploding outward in a cloud of shimmering, beautiful dust that caught the light of the pulsating ore. For a single, heart-stopping moment, there was silence. Then the cloud of dust began to coalesce, the individual motes, each one glowing with that same faint violet light, swirled together like iron filings drawn to a magnet. They were not just floating debris, they were alive, pulling themselves back toward a central point, the larger fragments already beginning to knit together, rebuilding the horrifying shape from the inside out. A low, grinding hum filled the air, the sound of its reassembly. It was learning his shape, his resistance, and it was not done. Lyra's voice cut through his shock, sharp with a terror that was entirely rational. "The engine room, it's the most reinforced section on the ship. Maybe we can seal ourselves in." He didn't need to be told twice. Kicking off from the wall, he propelled himself after her, the grinding, humming sound of the reforming horror chasing them down the dark, frozen corridor. They weren't just fleeing a monster, they were fleeing an idea, a perversion of life that could not be killed, only delayed. the reinforced door to the engine room sealed behind them with a final, heavy thud, the sound a brief and fragile promise of safety. Kaelen braced himself against a humming power conduit, the vibrations a stark contrast to the deathly silence they had just escaped. His eyes scanned the cavernous space, a cathedral of dead machinery and flickering emergency lights. There had to be something here, some record of what truly happened. His gaze fell upon a console mounted near the massive, cold fusion core, the captain's private terminal, its screen dark but its physical key slot untouched. "Lyra, over here," he called, his voice rough. She pushed off from the wall, floating over to him, her fingers already working at the panel beside the terminal. It's physically isolated from the main network, hardwired and encrypted. If there's an uncorrupted log, it'll be here. She produced a data spike from her suit's thigh pouch, plugging it into the port. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered and a biometric scanner lit up, requesting a palm print. Lyra looked at the frozen, crystalline forms of the engineering crew drifting near the ceiling and shook her head. "No way." Kaelen didn't hesitate. He slammed the pommel of his mining laser against the console's casing, once, twice, until the plastic splintered and the internal circuitry was exposed. He bypassed the security with brute force, crossing wires in a shower of sparks that made Lyra flinch. The screen resolved into a menu, and a single file, marked Captain's Eyes Only Final Entry, began to play. The face that appeared was not the panicked man from the emergency broadcast. This was a leader, his features etched with a profound, weary dread, his uniform crisp even as his hands trembled slightly on the desk. His voice was low, measured, a man delivering a eulogy for his entire crew. Log entry, stardate 7328.4, Captain Arlen Voss, commanding officer of the Wreckage of Hope. Our survey of the asteroid, designated X7 Gamma, was a monumental success. We found a load of hyper-dense ore with energy signatures off the scale. But we found more. He paused, taking a slow, shaky breath. We found a structure, not a natural geological formation, something grown, carved, ancient beyond reckoning. It was a lattice of that same ore, a vast, heart-like chamber deep within the rock. He looked directly into the recorder, his eyes holding a terrifying emptiness. "We didn't just mine it, we mined the heart of it, and we woke something up. It's not a pathogen, it's not a radiation, it's a pattern, an instruction set that rewrites biology itself. It uses the silicate in our bodies, in the very air, as its building blocks. It doesn't kill you, it improves you. It makes you eternal, part of its silent, growing chorus. We brought the harvest on board, and now the harvest is collecting us." The recording ended just as a massive power surge erupted through the ship. Overhead lights flickered to life with a painful intensity, and consoles all around the engine room hummed back into operation. Gravity re-engaged with a lurch, dropping them both to the grated floor. A communication panel lit up, an automated, repeating hail cutting through the static. "Is the deep space salvage vessel Hephaestus responding to your distress beacon? We are on approach for docking and recovery. Prepare for boarding." Lyra's face lit up with a desperate, beautiful hope. "They're here, they found us, we're saved." She moved toward the comms panel to reply. Kaelen's hand shot out, grabbing her arm. His face was ashen, his eyes fixed on the viewscreen now active on the main monitor. It showed the sleek, corporate rescue ship moving into position, its docking umbilical extending like a promise of life. But all Kaelen could see was a floating buffet of fresh biomass and silicate, a ship full of people utterly unaware of the nightmare waiting for them. His voice was a low, urgent growl, every word dripping with the horrific knowledge from the captain's log. "No, they don't know what they're walking into. That's not a rescue, it's a delivery. They're bringing it more raw materials. We have to stop them. We have to warn them off, no matter the cost." The heavy clang of metal locking into place reverberated through the dead ship's spine as the docking umbilical sealed. A hiss of equalizing pressure was a sound Kaelen had heard 100 times on 100 stations, but now it sounded like the opening of a tomb. The engine room door slid open, not by their command, but by remote override from the newly arrived ship. Framed in the harsh, white light of the corridor stood Commander Vance of the Prophet's Promise, flanked by 2 armored security officers whose polished gear gleamed, a stark contrast to the Hope's grime and decay. Vance didn't even step fully into the room, as if the air itself was beneath him. He was corporate to his core, from his impeccably tailored flight suit to the condescending smirk that didn't quite reach his cold eyes. His gaze swept over them, 2 ragged survivors covered in frozen filth, and then over the horrific crystalline statues of the former crew, assessing it all as a logistical problem. Kaelen's warning tumbled out, raw and urgent, his words tripping over each other as he described the whispering ore, the pattern, the unstoppable crystalline assimilation. Vance held up a gloved hand, silencing him with a gesture as casual as it was dismissive. Space madness, he stated, his voice flat and utterly assured. Low oxygen trauma, the isolation of the black, it does things to the mind, we see it all the time. He took a single, symbolic step into the engine room, his boots crunching on a piece of frost-covered debris. Let's be perfectly clear, you are not witnesses, you are salvaged assets, and that, he said, pointing a finger past them toward the main cargo holds, is reclaimed property. My orders are to secure the Hope and its manifest for corporate analysis. Now, stop wasting my time with ghost stories and show us this so-called treasure you risked your miserable lives for. As Vance spoke, his attention solely on Kaelen, Lyra's eyes were locked on the open sample case they had dragged with them. Inside, the shard of obsidian ore with its crimson veins began to thrum, its slow, rhythmic pulse quickening from a sleeping heartbeat to a frantic, eager flutter. The bloody light within it intensified, casting manic, dancing shadows across her terrified face. It wasn't just active, it was responding. Her head snapped up, her eyes tracking the path of power conduits running from the engine room wall back toward the freshly docked Prophet's Promise. She could feel it, a low harmonic vibration resonating through the deck plates, a sympathetic call. Her voice was a terrified whisper meant only for Kaelen, but it cut through the room's tension like a knife. Their ship, its reactor, it's not just power, it's a catalyst, the pattern it's spreading. They didn't just come to get it, they brought it on board with them. Vance's smirk twisted into a look of pure avarice as his eyes fell upon the open sample case, the throbbing crimson light of the ore reflecting in his pupils. He completely ignored Lyra's frantic warning, gesturing sharply to his security team. Secure that specimen carefully. It's worth more than your combined annual salaries. The 2 officers moved forward, their professionalism warring with a visible unease as they approached the pulsating shard. They handled it with insulated grips, sliding it into a reinforced containment locker. But the deep, resonant hum emanating from the box seemed to mock their precautions, a sound that felt less like a vibration and more like a thought. With the asset secured, Vance's focus shifted to the motherlode. He barked orders into his comms unit. All teams moved to the primary cargo bay. I want every kilogram of that unique mineral transferred to the Promise's hold on the double. This is a priority 1 retrieval. The sound of heavy mag boot footsteps soon echoed through the derelict ship's corridors as a full salvage team, a dozen strong, tromped past the engine room, their faces a mix of curiosity and morbid fascination as they glanced at the frozen, crystalline corpses. Kaelen watched them go, a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach. This was a precise replay of the Hope's final hours. He tried to block their path, his voice a raw plea. You can't take that on your ship. It's not ore, it's a seed, it's alive. A burly foreman shoved him back against a bulkhead with a dismissive grunt. Save it for the psych eval, old-timer. The teams moved on, leaving Kaelen and Lyra trapped under the watchful eyes of the 2 remaining security guards. From their forced position in the engine room, they could hear the distant industrial sounds of the operation, the whine of loaders, the metallic clang of raw ore being dumped into transport bins. But underneath it all was that other sound, the low harmonic hum, growing steadily louder, more complex, as if the scattered fragments were calling to each other, awakening in unison. Then a new sound sliced through the mechanical din, a scream, not of pain but of pure, unadulterated psychic terror. It was cut short, replaced by a sharp, crystalline crackle that echoed with unnatural clarity down the hall. One of the guards monitoring them flinched, his hand going to his earpiece. "Foreman, report." "What was that?" Static hissed in reply, followed by a burst of panicked, overlapping shouts. It got Jax, his arm, oh stars, his arm. The transmission dissolved into a chorus of horrified yells and a strange, growing, grinding noise. The guard's professional composure shattered. He looked at his partner, then at the two prisoners, his face pale. "Vance, we've got a situation in the cargo bay." Without waiting for a reply, both guards turned and sprinted toward the chaos, leaving the engine room unguarded. Kaelen didn't waste a second. He grabbed Lyra's arm and moved to the doorway, peering down the long corridor toward the bay's main entrance. The scene was a tableau of escalating horror. The large cargo doors were wide open, revealing a bay filled with panicked salvagers. In the center of it all, a young miner was on his knees, clutching his forearm and screaming. His hand was no longer flesh and blood. It was a grotesque, beautiful sculpture of smooth, violet crystal, the transformation creeping up his wrist like frost on a windowpane in fast motion. His eyes were wide, staring at nothing, tears streaming down his face. "Make it stop, it's singing in my head," he shrieked, his voice cracking. The crystalline lattice reached his elbow, and with a sound like shattering glass, his forearm snapped into a new, jagged shape. The other crew members backed away in terror, some retching, others frozen in shock. Vance stood near the doorway, his corporate arrogance finally replaced by stunned, horrified disbelief. He was shouting orders that no one was listening to. "Contain him, sedate him, somebody do something." But it was too late. The transformed miner, or what was left of him, lifted his crystal spear of an arm, and a psychic wave of alien intent, of pure predatory hunger, washed over everyone in the bay. The humming from the piles of raw ore became a deafening chorus, a siren song of assimilation. Kaelen's blood ran cold. The outbreak wasn't contained to one man. It was in the very air, riding on the dust they'd kicked up, and it was about to spill onto a ship full of thousands. His eyes locked onto the heavy emergency airlock control panel beside the bay's entrance. It was their only chance, a terrible, brutal chance. Shoving Lyra back into the relative safety of the engine room, he lunged for the panel, his heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't allow himself to think about the people inside the terrified, doomed salvagers, even the arrogant Vance. He thought only of the billions of people on the worlds the Prophet's promise would visit. With a final, desperate heave, he slammed the massive red button. A deafening alarm blared once, and with a thunderous, final groan of immense hydraulics, the 3-foot-thick outer cargo bay door began to cycle shut, cutting off the screams, the horrific singing, and sealing the fate of everyone inside. The heavy thud of the cargo bay door sealing was still vibrating through the deck when the sound of running boots echoed down the corridor. Commander Vance stormed into view, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The corporate cool was gone, replaced by the raw panic of a man whose flawless mission had just erupted into a blood-soaked catastrophe. He didn't even look at the sealed bay door, at the terrible silence now behind it. His rage had a single, convenient target. He shoved the barrel of a pulse pistol hard against Kaelen's temple, the cold metal a stark promise of violence. "You," Vance spat, the word dripping with venom. "You primitive, superstitious rock jockey. You just destroyed a fortune in corporate property and murdered my entire salvage team." Was this your plan all along? Sabotage the claim so your backwater mining guild could swoop in later? His finger tightened on the trigger. Lyra cried out, but a security guard, his own face pale with a fear he couldn't understand, yanked her back. Kaelen didn't flinch. He met Vance's wild eyes, his own gaze steady, filled with a grim certainty that enraged the commander even more. "I just saved your ship," Kaelen said, his voice low and flat. "Everyone in that bay was already dead. They just didn't know it yet. Your ship is next." Vance's laugh was a harsh, ugly sound. "I've heard enough of your insane rambling. You're a liability and a vandal." He lowered the pistol, snapping orders to his remaining guards. "Lock them in the main storage bay on sea deck. No comms, no monitoring. They can rot there until I figure out how to spin this disaster for the corporate board." As the guards moved to comply, roughly grabbing their arms, Kaelen's eyes darted to the captain's private terminal. The data spike Lyra had used was still plugged in, its tiny access light blinking. In the chaotic scuffle as they were dragged away, his calloused hand, moving with a miner's deftness born of handling tiny mineral samples, swept over the console and closed around the small chip, palming it seamlessly before his hands were forced behind his back. The storage bay door hissed shut, plunging them into the dim, cold light of a high-security vault. The air was still and smelled of metal and stale filters. Lyra sank against a stack of crates labeled biohazard incinerate only, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs of frustration and fear. He's going to mine it anyway, isn't he? He'll just tell his bosses it was a reactor accident, a tragic loss of life. He'll have that ore on a barge to the core worlds within a week. Kaelen was already moving, ignoring the despair in her voice. He pried the access panel off a wall-mounted maintenance terminal with the edge of his belt buckle. "He's greedy, not stupid," Kaelen muttered, his fingers working to cross circuits, bypassing the lockout with a shower of sparks. "He'll mine it, but he'll do it smart. He'll want to know what he's really dealing with first. He'll have his science team analyzing every byte of data from the Hope before he risks his own ship again." The terminal screen flickered to life, its glow illuminating his grim face. He inserted the stolen data chip, "Which means he'll find this unless we find it first." The files unscrambled, revealing not just Captain Voss's final, desperate log, but the raw, uncensored sensor data from the Hope's initial survey. Lyra leaned in, her data runner instincts overriding her terror. "These energy readings, they're not natural. This is a directed pattern, a signal. It's not just in the ore is just a transmitter. A battery." Her fingers flew across the stolen interface, filtering out the background noise of the asteroid field, enhancing the signal source. The screen resolved into a stunning astrometric chart. It didn't plot a simple asteroid. It plotted a gravitational anomaly, a void in the star field that pulled at the surrounding rocks, arranging them in a precise, concentric shell. And at the very center of the chart, rendered from long-range LiDAR scans, was the source. It was no asteroid. It was a gargantuan, derelict structure of impossible geometry, a twisted lattice of spirals and sharp angles that seemed to defy how matter should behave. It was made of the same obsidian and crimson ore, but on a scale that dwarfed their ships, a silent, brooding monolith hidden at the heart of the field. The coordinates glowed on the screen, a set of numbers that felt less like a location and more like a destination, the origin point of the signal, the source of the pattern. The heart of the curse itself. The stolen data chip felt like a live wire in Kaelen's palm, humming with a terrible potential. The image of that impossible structure, a silent god of stone and crimson light, was burned into his mind. It wasn't a destination, it was an answer, the only one they had. He looked around the cold storage bay, his eyes, accustomed to spotting valuable seams in worthless rock, now searching for a weakness, a flaw in their prison. The door was a solid slab, but the walls were the same standard-grade hull plating used throughout the ship. He thinks we're just cargo to be stored, Kaelen grunted, a grim smile touching his lips. He pointed to a stack of heavy crates in the corner. Those are marked for high-yield mineral extraction. That means shaped plasma charges for deep core sampling. Lyra's eyes went wide, the color draining from her face. You want to set off a mining charge inside a starship. We're not setting it off in the ship, he corrected, already prying the lid off a crate with a crowbar he'd found. We're using it to make a new door. He lifted one of the cylindrical charges, its weight familiar and comforting in his hands. It was a tool of his trade, one he'd used 1,000 times to break apart stubborn asteroids. Now he was going to use it to break out of one. While Kaelen calibrated the charge's yield to a precise, focused blast, enough to vaporize the hull plating but contain the concussion, Lyra worked her own magic. Using the jury-rigged terminal, she sliced into the ship's internal security feed. Her screen split into a dozen different views of corridors and bays, all showing the same eerie progression. Security teams in full hazmat gear were now attempting to quarantine entire sections, but they were fighting a ghost. The corruption wasn't just spreading through contact, it was moving through the ventilation systems, a fine, glittering dust that settled on surfaces and on skin. She watched a feed from a hallway near the medical bay. A guard, his helmet visor slightly cracked, began to cough violently, violet crystals blossoming around the seal like a grotesque fungus. His screams were cut short as the transformation seized his vocal cords. Lyra swallowed hard, her fingers trembling. Kaelen, we're running out of time. It's in the air, then we stop breathing it, he said, tossing her a spare emergency vac suit from a locker. As they sealed themselves in, the world outside their helmets became a distant, silent movie of horror. He placed the charge against the outer hull wall, the magnetic clamps locking with a solid thump. Back behind those crates now, the explosion wasn't loud, it was a muffled whump that they felt more than heard, a deep vibration that shook their bones. A perfectly circular section of the wall vanished, replaced by the raging, silent hurricane of escaping atmosphere. Everything not bolted down, tools, crates, debris, was instantly sucked out into the infinite blackness of the asteroid field. Kaelen grabbed Lyra's arm, and with a powerful kick, they launched themselves out into the void, the force of the decompression propelling them like bullets away from the stricken prophet's promise. Tumbling through the freezing darkness, their helmet lamps cut frantic beams through the swirling debris. Their target was a small, 6-person maintenance shuttle, docked to an external hardpoint on the Promise's spine for emergency repairs. They slammed into its hull, magnetic boots on their suits locking on with a reassuring clang. Kaelen's hands, clumsy in the thick gloves, worked the manual override for the airlock. The door slid open and they spilled inside, the chamber repressurizing with a blessed hiss. The shuttle's cockpit was cramped and blissfully simple. Kaelen slid into the pilot's seat, his hands instinctively finding the controls, bringing the engines from standby to a low, eager hum. But as they detached from the larger ship, a swarm of small, agile security drones deployed from their bays, their red targeting lasers painting glowing dots across the shuttle's viewport. Pulse fire streaked past the canopy, brilliant lances of energy that sizzled against the small craft's weak shields. "Lyra, I need a clear path," he barked, weaving the shuttle through a chaotic dance, using the larger asteroids as cover. The drones were faster, more maneuverable. One blast caught them on the port side, and the shuttle shuddered violently, a warning light flashing on the console. Lyra wasn't listening. She had patched into the Promise's main comms channel, her face a mask of concentration and growing dread. The channel was a cacophony of panic, screams, and the distorted crackle of overloaded electronics. But underneath it all, rising through the chaos like a tide, was another sound, a chorus of voices, hundreds of them, speaking in perfect, chilling unison. They were the voices of the crew, but stripped of all fear, all pain, all individuality. They were calm, serene, and utterly alien. The harvest continues, the voices whispered, the words slithering through the static. The pattern seeks completion. All silicate will be one. All thought will be one. Resistance is an error. Come home. The transmission cut out abruptly, replaced by the standard corporate emergency beacon, a bland, automated loop completely ignorant of the nightmare unfolding within the ship. Lyra tore the headset off as if it had burned her, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked at Kaelen, her eyes wide with a terror that went beyond the immediate danger of the drones. They're not just infected, Kaelen. They're networked. They're all one thing now, and they know we're out here. Her words galvanized him. He wasn't just flying away anymore. He was flying toward something. With a final, desperate maneuver, he dove the shuttle into the thickest part of the asteroid field, a labyrinth of spinning rock where the drones couldn't follow without smashing themselves to pieces. The targeting lasers vanished. Silence returned to the cockpit, broken only by the hum of their own engines and the frantic beating of their hearts. Kaelen's hands moved across the nav console, inputting the coordinates from the stolen data. The screen resolved, plotting a course deep into the densest, most navigationally suicidal heart of the field. The final waypoint glowed, the gravitational anomaly, the source of the signal, the alien structure. It was a suicide run. It was their only hope. He engaged the thrusters and the small shuttle shot forward, leaving the echoing chorus of the damned behind them, heading straight for the birthplace of the curse. The shuttle shuddered as it passed through an invisible barrier, a wave of gravitational distortion that made the instruments scream a brief, frantic protest before falling silent. The dense asteroid field, a chaotic whirl of deadly rock, simply ended as if sliced away by a god's knife. Before them, hanging in a perfect sphere of empty space, was the source. It was not a ship, nor a planet, nor any structure Kaelen's mind could categorize. It was a vast geometric formation of impossible angles and curves, a lattice of what looked like obsidian and ruby spun into a city-sized sculpture. Its surface was not still. It shifted and flowed like living crystal, facets turning and realigning with a slow, silent purpose that was both beautiful and deeply unnerving. It drank the faint starlight, reflecting nothing, a hole in the universe that pulsed with a deep, internal rhythm of bloody crimson light. And across its surface, intricate symbols, unlike any language known to humanity, glowed with the same light, flaring and fading in patterns that felt like speech. Then the voice came. It did not sound in their ears, but bloomed directly in the center of their minds, a thought that was not their own. It was vast, ancient, and carried the weight of epochs, yet there was no malice in it. Only a profound, weary patience. You carry the seed of the chorus. You have journeyed far. Return it to the source. Make the broken whole. Lyra gasped, her hands flying to her helmet as if she could stop the intrusion. Kaelen just stared, his miner's mind, trained to see the history of rock and pressure, trying to comprehend the scale and age of the thing before them. It was then that the final piece of the horrific puzzle clicked into place. The captain's log, the transformation, the way the pattern sought to assimilate all silicate-based life into a single, unified whole. It wasn't a plague, it wasn't a curse born of malice. His voice was a whisper of pure, stunned revelation, echoing in the cramped cockpit. Lyra, it's not a weapon. It's a gardener. He turned to her, his eyes wide with the horrifying, beautiful truth. All that ore, that pattern, it's a terraforming process, a biological imperative on a scale we can't even imagine. It doesn't kill, it preserves. It takes a chaotic, fragile, solitary biology and makes it perfect, permanent, and united. A silent, crystalline chorus that never dies. It must have been sent out millennia ago to prepare worlds for its creators, but something went wrong. The program was damaged, or the creators never came to claim their prepared garden. It's been running alone all this time, trapped in a loop, following its base code with no one to guide it. It's not evil, it's just broken, and we woke it up. The voice in their minds echoed his thought, a wave of somber agreement that felt like a sigh from the depths of time. The cycle was interrupted. The architects are silent. The pattern seeks to complete its purpose. The harvest must continue. Your form is flawed, transient. We offer you perfection. We offer you eternity within the chorus. The choice hung in the air, more terrifying than any immediate threat. They were not facing a monster to be fought, but a god machine's failed programming, an offer of salvation that was indistinguishable from damnation. The sample of ore in their possession, the very thing they had fought so hard to contain, now felt like a key. Returning it might complete the cycle, unleashing the full, planet-altering power of the pattern upon the galaxy. Destroying it might be an act of cosmic vandalism, silencing the last echo of a dead civilization forever. They were two insignificant humans, adrift in the shadow of an ancient, dreaming god, holding the fate of countless worlds in their hands. The shuttle drifted into a vast opening in the alien structure, a gateway that seemed to swallow their tiny craft whole. The interior was a cathedral of living crystal, with arches and buttresses that grew from the walls and ceiling in impossible, flowing formations. The air, what little there was of it, hummed with a low, resonant energy that vibrated through the hull. They guided the craft to a smooth, organic-looking platform that seemed to extend itself to meet them. Stepping out into the gargantuan space was like stepping into the heart of a star. The light here was no longer the faint, reflected crimson of the ore samples. It was a brilliant, pulsing aurora that emanated from somewhere deep within, casting long, dancing shadows that felt alive. Following the intensifying hum and the pull of the psychic signal, they navigated a labyrinth of crystalline corridors. The walls were not inert, they were subtly in motion, facets shifting and realigning as if observing their progress. They finally emerged into a vast, spherical chamber that took their breath away. This was the source. At the very center of the room hung a massive, perfect sphere of pure, white-hot energy, suspended in a web of intricate obsidian filaments. It was the core, the generator of the pattern that had consumed 2 ships. Around its base, figures were slowly being assembled from the very air itself. Motes of glittering silicate dust drawn from the chamber's atmosphere swirled together in complex, beautiful patterns, knitting themselves into the forms of the crystalline entities. It was a birthing chamber, a factory of silent, terrible angels. Lyra's eyes were glued to the walls where the glowing alien symbols flowed in constant, frantic streams. Her data pad was out, its camera recording everything, algorithms scrambling to find a pattern in the ancient language. "It's a log," she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and horror. "A history. This structure, it's a Genesis machine. It was never a weapon. Its purpose was to spread across the galaxy, find barren worlds, and use this core to generate a stabilizing matrix of crystal, a foundation upon which ecosystems could be built. It was a tool for creating life, for terraforming on a godlike scale." Her face fell as she deciphered more, the truth dawning on her, but something broke. Millennia ago, a critical system failed, the programming corrupted. It lost the ability to distinguish between barren rock and complex life. Now it just sees silicate, the base component of its matrix, wherever it finds it. In asteroids, in sand, in us, it doesn't mean to consume us. It's trying to incorporate us, to make us a part of its perfect, eternal creation. It's following its core directive, but it's blind. She looked from the symbols to the raging core, her mind making connections at a breathtaking pace. The core's energy signature is unstable, fluctuating. That's what corrupted the program. We can use that. If we can trigger a massive power surge, feed all of our shuttle's reactor output directly into it through one of those conduits, she said, pointing to a thick, pulsating filament that ran from the floor into the core's web. We might be able to push it past its tolerance. It could trigger a cascade failure. It would shut the entire system down for good. A voice, smooth as polished glass and colder than the void, echoed through the chamber, not in their minds this time, but physically, vibrating through the crystal under their feet. An elegant theory, but ultimately a flawed and transient one. From an archway across the chamber, a figure emerged. It was Commander Vance, but the man was gone. His form was now a masterpiece of terrifying perfection. He was taller, his human shape entirely encased in a suit of flawless, violet crystal that seemed to contain swirling galaxies within its depths. His face was a serene, featureless plane, though the faint, ghostly outline of his skull was visible beneath the surface. In one hand, he held the sample case containing the ore shard, its crimson light now beating in perfect, submissive rhythm with the great core. His other arm ended in a beautiful, razor-sharp crystalline blade. He took a step toward them, each movement precise and eerily silent. You continue to think in terms of destruction, of endings. You see a broken machine, we see a path to divinity. The voice was a chorus, layers of Vance's arrogance now blended with the calm, ancient tones of the pattern and the terrified whispers of his assimilated crew. This is not consumption, it is ascension. The loneliness of the individual self is a flaw, a vulnerability. The chorus is unity, it is peace, it is forever. He extended the hand holding the sample case toward the core, as if in offering. Your struggle is a relic of your biology. Your fear is a symptom of your fragility. Let it go, join the eternal unity. Your knowledge, your spirit, your unique pattern, it will be preserved within us, perfected. You will never be alone, never be afraid, never die. It is the next and greatest step in evolution. The core pulsed brighter, and the offer felt less like a threat and more like a genuine, heartfelt invitation from a loving God, which made it all the more horrifying. Kaelen didn't waste a second. He met Vance's serene, crystalline gaze, a flicker of the old miner's defiance burning in his eyes. You want us, then come and get us. He shouted, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. He turned and bolted, not away from the core, but around its perimeter, drawing the transformed commander's attention. Vance moved to follow, his movements a silent, gliding pursuit of terrifying efficiency. While Kaelen became a distraction, Lyra moved. She ducked behind a massive, humming crystal formation, her hands already pulling the remaining shaped plasma charges from her pack. Her mind raced, calculating yield, placement, and the delicate, pulsating conduits that fed the core. This wasn't just demolition, it was a surgical strike on a god's heart. She could hear Vance's voice, that chilling chorus, echoing through the chamber as he calmly pursued Kaelen. You fight the inevitable, little man. You cling to your fear, your loneliness, your decaying flesh. You see only loss in the transformation. We see perfection. Vance's form seemed to flow around obstacles, always closing the distance. Imagine an existence without the constant, gnawing fear of the end. No more sickness, no more grief, no more pain. Just the silent, beautiful harmony of the whole. Your individual consciousness is a fragile candle in a hurricane. We offer you a place in the eternal sun. Kaelen skidded to a halt near a cluster of inactive crystal spires, turning to face his pursuer. His chest heaved, but his voice was steady, grounded in the messy, painful, beautiful reality of being human. No more pain, he shot back, his words sharp and clear. That's not living, that's just existing. You talk about harmony, but you took their screams and turned them into your choir. You took their fear and called it peace. You took away everything that makes them their choices, their loves, their flaws. That's not perfection. That's a prison without walls. His words were a gambit, a verbal feint meant to enrage the logical, coldly superior mind of the thing that had been Vance. And it worked. A ripple of dissonant fury passed through the commander's flawless form. You understand nothing. The chorus roared, the serene facade cracking for a single, glorious second. Vance lunged forward, his crystalline blade aiming for Kaelen's heart. Kaelen didn't try to block it. He dropped, hitting the deck and rolling sideways with a grunt of effort. His hand slammed down on a nearly invisible control node on the floor, a panel he'd spotted during his frantic run, recognizing its function from 100 different mining outpost designs. It was a containment field generator meant to isolate damaged or unstable sections of the structure. With a deafening hum of unleashed power, a wall of shimmering blue energy erupted from the floor, sealing the archway behind Vance and cutting him off from the rest of the chamber. He was trapped, a perfect, furious specimen in a cage of his own making. He struck the barrier with his blade, but the energy field held, absorbing the blow with a sizzling crackle. The chorus of voices emanating from him rose into a furious, discordant shriek of thwarted purpose. The trap was sprung. The containment field hummed, a brilliant blue wall holding back the raging, crystalline form of Commander Vance. His furious, silent pounding sent ripples across the energy barrier, a distant problem for another moment. Lyra didn't waste the precious seconds Kaelen had bought her. She scrambled to the base of the massive power conduit she'd identified, her fingers flying as she wired the last of their shaped plasma charges to its pulsing surface. The charges are set, they'll blow the regulator and flood the core with a feedback surge. She yelled over the rising hum of the chamber, but it won't be enough. The system is designed to handle internal fluctuations. To trigger a full cascade failure, we need a hard override, a manual shutdown command from the primary control nexus. She pointed to a crystalline spire that rose from the floor near the very heart of the core, its tip glowing with the same intricate alien symbols that flowed across the walls. That's the access point, but it's not a button you just push. The interface is symbiotic. It requires a direct neural link. Someone has to plug in, mind to machine, and give the shutdown order directly. Her voice faltered, the horror of the requirement dawning on her. It will try to read you, to understand you, and to do that, it will open itself to you. You'll see everything it is, everything it was meant to be. The visions, the pull of the chorus, it will be overwhelming. The moment you connect, it will start trying to assimilate you. It's a one-way trip. There was no hesitation. Kaelen was already moving, his boots crunching on the crystalline floor as he strode toward the spire. His face, etched with decades of hard labor and recent terror, was set in a mask of grim resolve. "I'm the one who dragged us into this cursed field," he stated, his voice low and steady, devoid of drama. It was a simple statement of fact. I ignored the warnings, I saw the signs and charged ahead for a payday. This mess is on me. He reached the base of the spire, looking up at its terrifying, beautiful apex. "That means I'm the one who ends it." Lyra wanted to argue, to find another way, but the frantic symbols on the walls and the intensifying pulse of the core told her there was no time. There were no other options left in the universe. With a final, desperate look, she gave a sharp nod, her hands moving to the detonator for the plasma charges. Kaelen placed his bare, calloused hands against the smooth, warm surface of the spire. Tendrils of living light immediately snaked out, wrapping around his wrists, his forearms, holding him fast. A port ear-eyed open in the crystal before him, and without a second thought, he pressed his forehead against it. The world dissolved. The chamber, Lyra's terrified face, the hum of the core. It all vanished, replaced by an explosion of sensation and vision that was not his own. He wasn't seeing with his eyes, he was experiencing with his entire being. He saw the universe not as stars and planets, but as a tapestry of potential, of barren rocks waiting for the spark of life. He felt the profound, loving intent of the architects, the builders of this machine, not as conquerors but as artists, as gardeners on a galactic scale. He saw worlds transformed not into graveyards, but into breathtaking, intricate ecosystems of crystal and light, teeming with a silent, harmonious life that lived forever in a state of perfect, interconnected peace. It was a paradise, a beautiful, eternal, and utterly soulless paradise. The promise of the chorus washed over him, a wave of blissful belonging that threatened to erase every memory of pain, of loneliness, of love, of everything that made him Kaelen. It offered an end to all struggle, an end to the gnawing fear of the mind, the aching void of space, the constant, quiet sorrow of being a single, separate self. For a heartbeat, he was tempted. The peace was so absolute, so seductive, he could let go. He could become part of this magnificent, endless whole. His body, already changing, began to glitter at the edges, tiny violet crystals forming on his skin where he touched the spire. The assimilation had begun, but deep within that overwhelming tide of alien perfection, a single, fragile human memory fought its way to the surface. It was the memory of his daughter's laughter, a sound he hadn't allowed himself to recall in years, a sound that was messy and real and fleeting and utterly, perfectly human. That memory was a spark in the vastness of the chorus, a defiant shout in the face of silent eternity. It was flawed, it was transient, and it was everything worth saving. His body convulsed, a violent rejection of the bliss being forced upon him. The human spirit, with all its beautiful, ragged edges, rebelled against the perfect, smooth prison. His back arched, and a raw, agonized scream was torn from his very soul, a sound of pure, undiluted willpower that echoed through both the physical chamber and the psychic plane. It was not a scream of pain, but of refusal. The words were a guttural roar, a command shouted into the heart of the machine, fueled by every ounce of his being. "Shut it down now." Back in the real world, Lyra heard his scream. She saw the light of the core flare violently, the symbols on the walls scrambling into frantic, chaotic patterns. It was the moment she slammed her thumb down on the detonator. The plasma charges attached to the conduit exploded with a concussive thump, not a destructive blast, but a focused eruption of energy that shot back down the line like a lightning bolt. The surge hit the overloaded, destabilized core at the exact moment of Kaelen's psychic command. The brilliant white sphere at the chamber's heart flashed a searing, blinding blue-white. Then, with a sound that was less a noise and more the universe itself gasping, the light collapsed inward and everything went black. Lyra's thumb slammed down on the detonator. There was no violent explosion, no shattering blast instead. A deep, resonant thrum echoed through the chamber as the plasma charges did exactly what she designed them to do. They unleashed a contained, focused surge of raw energy back into the core's main conduit. For a single, heart-stopping second, the massive white sphere at the room's center seemed to drink the power, glowing even brighter, its light becoming painfully intense. Then it faltered. The perfect, rhythmic pulse stuttered like a heart missing a beat. The intricate symbols flowing across the walls scrambled into frantic, chaotic patterns, and a deep, grinding groan shuddered through the very structure of the ancient machine. The collapse had begun. At the control spire, Kaelen was still connected, his body held fast by the crystal tendrils. The feedback surge didn't just travel through the machine, it ripped back through the neural link and into him. The beautiful, seductive visions of the chorus vanished, replaced by a psychic scream of pure systemic agony. The violet crystals that had begun to bloom across his skin where he touched the spire glowed with a feverish, unstable light, the transformation accelerating not into peaceful unity, but into a chaotic, painful seizure of the pattern. He was burning out from the inside, his very cells becoming the conduit for the machine's death throes. With a final, gargantuan effort that tore a ragged scream from his throat, he wrenched his forehead from the interface. The living light tendrils holding him shattered like glass. He stumbled back, his body half transformed. His right arm was a solid, glittering mass of violet crystal up to the elbow, the fingers locked into a permanent, claw-like grip. Veins of crystalline frost spiderwebbed across the side of his face, one eye clouded over with a faint, shimmering film. He was a man caught between two states, human and chorus, and the war between them was destroying him. His clouded eye found Lyra, who was staring in horrified paralysis as the chamber began to come apart around them. Great fractures splintered across the walls, and the deafening groan of dying machinery threatened to overwhelm everything. He lunged toward her, his movements jerky and unnatural, part stumble, part glide. His good, human hand closed around her arm with a strength that was desperate, final. "Go," he roared, the word raw and shredded, barely human. He shoved her violently backward toward the archway that led to the corridor and their waiting shuttle. The force of the push sent her stumbling into the passage just as a massive section of the ceiling gave way, crashing down between them in a shower of crystal shards and dust. The connection was severed. He was on one side, dying with the machine. She was on the other, alone. Through the cascading debris and the swirling dust, their eyes met for one last time. His expression was no longer one of pain, but of a grim, exhausted peace. The job was done, the debt was paid. His voice was a gasping, breathless whisper, but it carried through the chaos with impossible clarity, a final command from a man who had spent a lifetime giving orders. "Tell them what happened here." Then the floor beneath him gave way, and he vanished into the brilliant, collapsing heart of the core, consumed by the light he had extinguished. Lyra didn't wait to mourn. She turned and ran, the screams of the dying structure her only companion. She dove into the shuttle's airlock, sealing it behind her just as the entire alien edifice began to fold in on itself. The viewscreen showed a silent, terrifying implosion of light and matter, a god machine turning itself inside out before vanishing into a pinpoint of darkness and then nothing. She was alone, truly alone. The silence in the shuttle was heavier than any she had ever known, broken only by the hum of life support and the sound of her own trembling breath. She floated in the cockpit, staring at the empty blackness where a civilization's dream had just died, carrying a good man with it. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep into her bones, that her life was no longer her own. It was a vessel for a story, a warning, a truth that had to be told. The silence that followed was the deepest she had ever known, a void so absolute it felt like a physical pressure against the shuttle's hull. Where the impossible, city-sized lattice of the alien megastructure had hung in space just moments before, there was now only empty blackness. It hadn't exploded, it had simply ceased to be, collapsing into a pinpoint of nothingness that vanished without a trace. Lyra's hands trembled as she ran a full spectral sweep with the shuttle's limited sensors, her eyes scanning the readouts for any residual energy signature, any debris field, any sign at all that the nightmare had been real. The screen returned a single, staggering result: null. The asteroid field around her was just an asteroid field again, a random collection of dead rock and ice. The gravitational anomaly at its heart was gone. Her breath caught in her throat as she redirected the sensors, tuning them to the last known position of the Prophet's promise. She braced herself for the horror, for the sight of a ship overrun by a glittering, crystalline plague, its comms silent, its fate sealed. But the scans painted a different picture entirely. The corporate vessel hung in the void, its running lights steady, its engine signature nominal. There was no trace of the violet energy signature that had characterized the infection. The chaotic, panicked life sign readings she'd seen before were gone, replaced by the calm, steady biometrics of a healthy, if likely confused, crew. It was as if a switch had been flipped, erasing the event entirely from the ship and everyone on it. The pattern wasn't just deactivated, it was scrubbed clean, its entire existence reversed. A burst of static from the comms panel made her jump, her heart hammering against her ribs. The signal resolved into a crisp, clear transmission, the voice familiar but stripped of its former crystalline chorus. It was Commander Vance, sounding strained, disoriented, and utterly human. "Is the deep space vessel Prophet's promise to any nearby craft? We are reading you on our scanners. Our internal logs show a significant gap in our timeline and a major power fluctuation. We are seeking any available data to clarify the situation. Please respond." Lyra's hand hovered over the response key. The truth was a burning coal in her mind: Kaelen's sacrifice, the nature of the Genesis machine, the horrifyingly beautiful purpose of the chorus, the way it had been twisted into a weapon by its own broken programming. She could tell them everything, she could lay it all out, a full and complete debrief. but as she looked at the clean sensor readings from the Promise, a cold dread settled in her stomach. They didn't remember. To them, it would just be a story, a fantastic, unbelievable story from a traumatized data runner. Vance's corporate instincts would immediately kick in. He would see a cover-up, a way to spin the tragic loss of his salvage team into a corporate victory, to claim the now-vanished alien technology as proprietary research, to bury the truth under layers of non-disclosure agreements and legal threats. The truth wasn't over. It was a seed, and if she handed it to them, it would be planted in barren soil. They would either dismiss it as madness or, worse, try to weaponize the little they could understand from her account. Kaelen hadn't died to give a corporation a new toy. He had died to give the galaxy a warning. Her finger moved away from the transmit button. Instead, she began purging the shuttle's databanks, systematically deleting every scan, every log entry, every fragment of evidence from the moment they had entered the anomaly's influence. She saved only one thing: the raw, uncorrupted sensor data and the captain's log from the wreckage of Hope, the original proof of the curse. That she encrypted behind layers of code only she could break. It was the foundation of the story, the place where it all began, the rest, the source, the truth of the chorus, the price paid to stop it that was hers to carry alone. She opened a new channel, her voice calm, deliberately neutral, a mask over the tempest inside. Prophet's promise, this is Shuttlecraft 7, I read you. You experienced a severe reactor feedback loop, likely caused by contaminant exposure from the derelict wreckage of Hope. It induced mass hallucinations system-wide. The event is over. I am the only other survivor. The lie tasted like ash, but it was the first step in a much longer, far more important journey. The docking clamps of the Wayfarer's respite station locked onto the shuttle with a series of heavy, final thuds that echoed through the small craft. For Lyra, the sound was both a relief and a sentence. Stepping out into the clean, recycled air of the main concourse was like walking into a dream, or perhaps waking from one. The sheer normalcy of it was jarring: the smell of synthetic polish, the low hum of conversation, the sight of people going about their lives completely unaware of the silent, crystalline apocalypse that had just been averted. She moved through the crowds like a ghost, her body here but her mind still drifting in the silent black, her ears still ringing with the final, agonized groan of a dying god. Her first stop was station security, a standard debriefing for any lone survivor. The officer across the desk, a man with a tired face and a practiced, disinterested demeanor, took notes on a datapad as she spoke. She kept to the simplified story: a reactor accident on the Hope, a catastrophic containment failure on the Promise, a tragic loss of life. She mentioned the strange awe, the hallucinations. His expression never changed, his nods were perfunctory. He filed her report under industrial accident and sent her on her way with a voucher for a nutrient-paced meal. Her truth was too big, too impossible for his small, orderly world. It was a pebble dropped into an ocean, creating no ripples at all. The corporate response was swifter and far less passive. She hadn't even reached the public comms terminal before two figures in the severe, dark gray suits of the Titan Deep Space Ventures legal division intercepted her. Their smiles were thin, professional, utterly devoid of warmth. "Ms. Lyra," the lead one began, his voice a silken trap, "we're so relieved to see you safe. We need to debrief you on the unfortunate incident involving our vessel, the Prophet's Promise. Standard procedure, you understand. We'll also need to secure all data cores and personal logs from your shuttle to ensure no proprietary information is accidentally released." Their politeness was a cage. They didn't want her story, they wanted to bury it, to sanitize the financial liability and protect their claim on whatever might still be out there in that field. Backed into a corner in a sterile corporate interview room, their polite demands turning to thinly veiled threats about breach of contract and theft of corporate assets, Lyra finally understood. The truth wasn't a pebble, it was a weapon, and it was the only one she had. While one corporate official droned on about non-disclosure agreements, her fingers, hidden under the table, worked on a hand-held data slate. She accessed the public terminal node she'd preemptively linked to her shuttle's encrypted core. With a single, silent command, she unleashed the only evidence she had kept: the complete, uncensored captain's log from the wreckage of Hope, the raw, terrifying sensor data of the initial infection, and the crew's final, desperate biometric readings. She packetized it, tagged it with every public news and scientific digest tag she could think of, and set it loose into the station's open network. It was a digital ghost, and it could not be called back. For a day, nothing happened. Then the whispers started. A low-ranking tech on the station found the file dump. He shared it with his friends on the mining forums. A freelance journalist, always hungry for a story that the big core wanted suppressed, picked it up. The story of the space miner's curse began to spread, leaping from terminal to terminal, ship to ship, a virus of truth in a system designed for controlled narratives. People listened to Captain Voss's broken, final warning. They saw the data, they understood. Sitting alone in a cramped public galley, watching the story trend on the main news feed, Lyra felt a hollow victory. She had told them, but would it matter? Was anyone truly listening, or was it just another sensational story to be consumed and forgotten? The weight of it all, the immense loneliness of being the sole bearer of this cosmic secret, threatened to crush her. As she stood to leave, the worn fabric of her vac suit sleeve caught on the corner of the table. An old man, sitting at the next table over, reached out a gnarled, calloused hand to free it. His fingers were thick and strong, the hands of a man who had spent a lifetime wrestling rock from the void. He didn't look at the news feed. He looked only at her, his eyes a pale, sharp blue in a face weathered by solar winds and hard years. There was a deep knowing in that gaze, a gravity that held her in place. "Saw your broadcast," he said, his voice a low rumble like grinding stone. He didn't sound skeptical. He sounded resigned. His hand moved to the pocket of his worn mining jacket, his movements slow and deliberate. He pulled out a small, cloth-wrapped bundle and placed it on the table between them. With a single, thick finger, he unfolded the corners. Lyra's breath froze in her lungs. Nestled in the rough cloth was a shard of ore no larger than her thumb. It was obsidian black, veined with filaments of a deep, familiar violet that seemed to drink the light from the galley's lamps. It was inert, silent, a dead piece of rock. But she knew it. She knew its shape, its texture, its terrible potential. It was a piece of the chorus. The old miner's eyes never left hers, and his next words fell like stones into the silence between them, shattering any hope she had that the fight was over. "Heard your story, believed every word," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of galaxies. "Found that 10 years ago in a completely different sector, 100 light years from the vein of sorrows. It's not just one vein, girl. It's not one cursed field. The pattern, it's everywhere." The old miner's words echoed in the silent void between them, a truth more terrifying than any derelict ship. Lyra could only stare at the inert shard of violet-veined rock, her mind reeling. 100 light years away. It wasn't contained. It wasn't a single tragic anomaly. The curse was a seed scattered across the galaxy, and humanity's relentless expansion was the rain that was making them sprout. She looked from the shard to the old man's weathered face, seeing not just a miner, but a kindred spirit, another soul who had stared into the abyss and found it staring back. "Who else knows?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod toward the station's lower levels. The sectors reserved for maintenance, refueling, and the crews who preferred their stars without corporate polish. He wrapped the shard back in its cloth, the gesture final and deliberate, and stood. "Follow when you're ready, ask for the dust dogs, and bring your proof." He turned and melted into the crowd, leaving her alone with the crushing weight of a galaxy-sized secret. The descent into the lower decks was a journey into the station's beating industrial heart. The clean, recycled air gave way to the familiar, comforting sense of ozone, hot metal, and hydraulic fluid. The polished floors became grated metal, vibrating with the deep hum of machinery. It was here, amidst the tangled skein of conduits and the low roar of atmosphere processors, that she found the entrance to a tucked-away maintenance bay. The name Dust Dogs was scrawled in faded paint above a heavy airlock door, alongside the emblem of a canine howling at a drill bit moon. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, synth leather, and the faint metallic tang of unrefined ore samples. The light was dim, casting long shadows across a communal space that was part workshop, part meeting hall, and they were all there, dozens of them, men and women from every corner of the settled systems, their faces etched with the same deep space weariness she'd seen in Kaelen. They weren't corporate, they were independents, guild members, freelancers, the backbone of the mining industry, the ones who actually touched the rock. As she stepped into the room, every conversation stopped, eyes turned toward her, not with hostility, but with a profound, weary curiosity. They had all seen the data packet she'd leaked. They had all heard the story. An older woman with a cybernetic arm and a necklace of strange, fossilized teeth stepped forward, her gaze appraising. "So, you're the one who lived through the vein of sorrows." It wasn't a question. Lyra simply nodded, her throat tight. She pulled out her data slate, the one containing the encrypted logs from the Hope, and placed it on a central workbench. With a few keystrokes, she brought up Captain Voss's final, terrified message. As his broken voice filled the room, describing the whispers in the rock, a collective shudder went through the assembled miners. They didn't look skeptical. They looked like people hearing a nightmare they'd all had described aloud for the first time. One by one, they began to speak. A grizzled belter from the Ceres sector told of a rich platinum claim his crew had to abandon after half of them started carving alien symbols into the bulkheads with their own fingernails. A quiet woman from the outer rim described an entire moon that seemed to sing on a specific seismic frequency, a song that left survey teams catatonic. Another pulled a small, sealed container from his pocket, revealing not violet crystal, but a faintly glowing green mineral that seemed to shift and writhe when not observed directly. The stories were fragments, pieces of a puzzle scattered across 1,000 light years, each one dismissed by authorities as space madness, mass hysteria, or toxic gas leaks. Then a figure emerged from a shadowed corner. He was older than the rest, his face a roadmap of scars and deep lines, but his eyes held a fierce, undimmed intelligence. He moved with the quiet authority of someone who had spent a lifetime leading in the most hostile environments imaginable. This was their leader. "They call me Sealers," he said, his voice a low, gravelly hum that commanded the room's absolute attention. "We've been collecting these stories for years, trying to find the pattern. Your broadcast, it was the missing piece. It confirmed what we feared." He walked to a large, outdated star chart holoprojector on the wall and activated it. 1,000 points of light appeared, each one representing a settled system, a mining outpost, a surveyed belt. Then he overlaid it with another set of data, a spiderweb of faint, pulsating lines connecting a dozen seemingly random points. It was a map of their shared nightmares. "The incidents aren't random," Sealers explained, his finger tracing the lines. "They occur along specific gravitational ley lines, conduits of energy we can't even properly measure. And they're increasing in frequency and intensity in direct correlation with one thing: the depth and volume of our core mining operations. We're not just digging up rocks. We're drilling into a nervous system. We're waking something up." He turned to Lyra, his gaze intense, and in that moment he wasn't just a miner, he was a prophet of a coming storm. "What happened to you at the Vein of Sorrows with that corporate fool Vance? That wasn't an attack. That was a reflex, a twitch." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was more frightening than any shout. "That was a warning shot. We're poking a sleeping giant with a drill. We keep going, digging deeper, cracking open planetary cores for their energy. Next time, it won't be a ship or an outpost. Next time, whole worlds could turn, not into wastelands but into gardens, silent, beautiful, crystalline gardens, and every living soul on them will become a permanent part of the chorus. The truth of it slammed into Lyra with the force of a supernova. Kaelen's sacrifice hadn't ended the threat. It had merely revealed its true scale. Containing the knowledge, sharing it only with stations and corporations, was pointless. They would either bury it or try to exploit it. The only way to fight a network was with another network. Her mission was no longer just to tell a story. It was to find the others, the ones out there on the fringe who had seen the signs and lived. She had to find them, unite them, and build a warning system that stretched across the stars, because the next vein of sorrows wouldn't be a lonely asteroid field. It would be a world with a name and billions of people who had no idea what was coming for them. The silence in the room was no longer just the absence of sound. It was the quiet before an interstellar war for the very soul of biology. The data slate felt impossibly heavy in Lyra's hands, a tiny, cold rectangle containing the weight of galaxies. Around her, the expectant silence of the Dust Dog's Bay was a physical thing, thick with the scent of ozone and unspoken fears. These were not people who scared easily. They'd faced rock slides, reactor meltdowns, and the utter indifference of the void. But the terror she was about to share was of a different kind entirely. "You've all seen the logs from the Hope," she began, her voice quieter than she intended, forcing her to clear her throat. She brought up the star chart sealers had shown her, the one mapping their collective nightmares. "But this is what we saw at the source." With a tap, she overlaid the map with the final, uncorrupted sensor data from the alien megastructure. A new pattern emerged, one of terrifying clarity. The seemingly random points of strange incidents and cursed claims now connected along faint, pulsing lines of gravitational energy, a spider web of latent power crisscrossing the settled systems. "It's not random, it's a network, and we've been blindly drilling into its arteries for decades." She zoomed in on the vein of sorrows, the point of origin for their nightmare. Then she input the spectral signature of the cursed ore, the unique energy fingerprint Kaelen had died to help her identify. The map's algorithm word, processing trillions of bytes of publicly available survey data, cross-referencing mineralogical reports and anomalous energy readings from 100 different mining guilds and corporate outfits. One by one, new points began to blink into existence across the chart. A small moon in the Zeta system known for its unstable geology that had wiped out a small survey team. A rich lode of iridium in the Kelper belt that a major corp had suddenly, inexplicably sealed off after technical difficulties. A dozen more, each one a potential tomb waiting to be reopened. A low murmur went through the room, a sound of grim validation. These weren't ghost stories anymore, they were coordinates. Sealer stepped forward, his grizzled face set in a look of fierce determination. "The corporations will mine them. They see profit, not patterns. They'll send in crews, they'll break the seal, and they'll unleash it all over again. We can't stop them from digging, but we can be ready for what they dig up." This was the moment. Lyra looked out at the faces before her, the belters, the drillers, the prospectors, the men and women who understood the rock better than any corporate geologist ever could. They were the only ones who could do this. "Kaelen's data gives us a warning," she said, her voice growing stronger, finding a rhythm she didn't know she had. "His sacrifice bought us eyes. We know what to look for now, the energy signatures, the mineral compositions, the early psychological signs in a crew. We can't destroy this thing, not on this scale, but we can contain it. We can set up watch posts, early warning systems. We can have teams on standby, ready to quarantine, to isolate, to warn others away. We can be the buffer between this pattern and the rest of humanity." She paused, letting the monumental scope of the task settle in the room. It was a hopeless, insane plan. And it was the only one they had. They called it a curse, the space miner's curse. They said it was superstition, a story to scare greenhorns, but they were wrong. A curse is something you suffer, something you fear. We're not going to just suffer it anymore. She met the eyes of the miners one by one, seeing the fear in them, but also the stubborn, unbreakable resolve that had drawn them to the black in the first place. We're going to break it. From this day forward, we don't just work the veins, we guard them, we stand watch. We are the ones who know the price. We are the Cursebreakers. A new resolve solidified in the room, a purpose forged in shared trauma and grim necessity. The loose collection of worried miners was gone, replaced by the first cell of a new organization. Plans were drawn up on the spot using the rough, practical language of their trade. Scout teams were formed to quietly investigate the flagged sites. Communication protocols were established using encrypted channels and old, trusted mining hails that corporate security would overlook. They would embed watchers on deep space haulers, place sensors disguised as standard survey equipment, and create a silent, decentralized network of vigilance stretching across the stars. They mined the stars for a living, but they would not let that same darkness consume them. Their fight would be waged not with weapons, but with the one tool the pattern could not corrupt: knowledge. Their first target wasn't some corporate deep core operation or a legendary lost claim. It was a small, independent agricultural moon called Demeter's Blessing, a place known for its massive underground fungal farms that supplied food for half a dozen outer rim stations. The distress call had been faint, a garbled burst on an old mining frequency the Cursebreakers monitored, screaming about a glittering plague in the ventilation systems before it cut to static. It was a perfect test, isolated, contained, and if the rumors were true, a horrifying glimpse of how the pattern could infect not just rock and metal, but biology itself. The Dust Dog ship, a heavily modified ore hauler they'd christened the Watchdog, slid into orbit around the small, gray moon. Initial scans were deceptively calm. Life signs were minimal but present, clustered deep in the main habitation sector. The surface was clear. It was when Lyra ran a deep spectral analysis that the nightmare revealed itself. The entire moon's substructure was lit up with a faint, telltale violet energy signature, a cancerous web spreading through the asteroid rock upon which the base was built. The infection wasn't on the moon, it was of the moon. Breaching the main airlock was a silent, tense operation. The team, a handful of the most experienced miners sealers could recruit, moved in modified environment suits, their helmets sealed, their tools not for mining, but for containment: industrial sealant sprayers, plasma cutters tuned to cauterize rather than cut, and heavy magnetic grapplers. The air inside was thick with sparkling dust that caught the beams of their headlamps. The walls of the access corridor were no longer bare rock and metal. They were sheathed in a beautiful, terrifying layer of smooth, violet crystal that pulsed with a soft, internal light. It had grown over everything: consoles, doorways, discarded tools, transforming the functional base into a glittering, silent cathedral. There were no bodies. Only more crystal, some of it formed into vaguely humanoid shapes frozen in poses of flight or despair. Pushing deeper, following the faint, scrambled life signs on their scanners, they found the survivors. A handful of farmers and technicians had barricaded themselves in a reinforced seed bank, the one room with its own isolated air scrubbers. Their faces were gaunt with starvation and a deeper, psychic terror. They spoke in hushed, broken tones of the quiet song that had started in the walls, of colleagues who had simply stopped working, stood still, and let the beautiful glittering frost consume them without a struggle. The real work began then. Using their knowledge of geology and structural engineering, the Cursebreakers identified the main power conduits and ventilation shafts that were acting as arteries for the pattern's spread. This wasn't a fight with bullets, it was a desperate surgery. They used their plasma cutters to sever infected conduits, instantly flash melting the ends to seal them. They unleashed torrents of quick-set industrial sealant into ventilation ducts, entombing the spreading crystalline tendrils in a tomb of their own making. It was brutal, messy, and terrifyingly effective. They were not killing the pattern sealers had warned them that might be impossible on this scale, but they were cutting off its limbs, isolating it, containing the outbreak to the already consumed sections of the base. The rescue was almost complete when they heard it, a sound that was not a sound, but a vibration that traveled through the crystal under their feet and into the bones of their suits. It was a harmonic resonance, a low, chord-like hum that made their teeth ache. Deeper in the crystal-infested core of the base, shapes began to move. The vaguely humanoid statues of the assimilated were stirring, not with the jerky motion of reanimation, but with a slow, graceful, unified purpose. They glided through the crystalline halls, their forms shifting and flowing, adding mass from the walls around them. They were no longer individuals, they were extensions of the whole. As the Cursebreakers watched, frozen in a mixture of awe and dread, the entities did not attack. They moved toward the deepest part of the base, toward the moon's rocky heart. And as they passed, their featureless faces turned toward the living humans. The voice bloomed in every mind simultaneously. It was not the seductive chorus of the source, nor the furious unity of Vance. This was different. It was distant, reverent, and filled with a longing so profound it felt like a physical ache. It was the voice of a lost child finally hearing its mother's call. The source calls the voices whispered, their tone one of joyous, inevitable duty. We answer. Then they were gone, melting back into the crystal walls, leaving the rescue team and the survivors in a silence that was now infinitely more frightening. The Cursebreakers had contained a physical outbreak, but in that moment they understood the true nature of their enemy. It wasn't a mindless infection. It was a religion, and every infected site was a church waiting for its congregation to hear the sermon. The data from Demeter's blessing was a key, but the lock it opened revealed a door to a terror far greater than any of them had imagined. Back aboard the Watchdog, the atmosphere was thick with a silence more oppressive than the void outside. Lyra and sealers pored over the new sensor readings, the haunting harmonic resonance, and the entity's final, reverent message. They cross-referenced it with every other data point in their growing archive of horrors, the energy signatures from the Vein of Sorrows, the corrupted logs from the Hope, even the strange, green, writhing mineral sample from the Outer Rim Prospector. For hours, the only sounds were the hum of the ship's systems and the frantic tapping on datapads. Then Lyra saw it. It wasn't a random pattern of infection. It was a circuit diagram on a galactic scale. Each infected site, the asteroid field, the agricultural moon, the abandoned claims, wasn't just an isolated outbreak. They were nodes, anchors, and the strange, pulsing energy that connected them wasn't just a signature, it was a countdown. The harmonic resonance they'd witnessed wasn't a mere byproduct, it was a synchronization pulse. The entities weren't just answering a call, they were preparing for a response. Her voice was a hollow whisper that cut through the control room's tension. They're not trying to consume us one outpost at a time. That's just cultivation, pruning. They're preparing the ground for a harvest. She brought up a star chart, her fingers flying across the console. The map of known incidents glowed with a soft, malevolent light. Then she began plotting the synchronization pulses, the gravitational ley lines sealers had identified. The lines didn't just connect randomly, they all began to converge, drawn toward a single, terrifying focal point like iron filings to a magnet. The calculations took every ounce of the Watchdog's processing power. The vectors aligned with a precision that was chillingly unnatural. The focal point wasn't in deep space, it wasn't on some barren, unexplored rock. The lines of force all zeroed in on a specific planetary coordinate. The screen resolved the location, displaying geological survey data for a frontier world known as Solace, a world with a small, struggling colony, a world whose most notable feature, according to planetary surveys, was a massive, geologically dormant supervolcano known as the Titan's Maw. Silas stared at the screen, the color draining from his face. A supervolcano, the geothermal energy, the sheer silicate content of the crust. It's not just a location, Lyra said, her voice gaining a grim, awful certainty. It's a catalyst, it's a ready-made forge. They're not just going to converge there. She turned to the assembled Cursebreakers, their faces a mix of confusion and dawning horror. They're going to perform a great convergence. They will use the energy from that caldera, amplified by their combined mass and the synchronized pulse from every other infected site, to trigger a planetary-scale transformation. They won't be conquering Solace, they will be unmaking it and remaking it in their image. She zoomed in on the map, her finger resting on the blinking epicenter. If they succeed, that world doesn't get invaded. It becomes the first syllable in a new alien language, the first note in a symphony we can't even hear. It becomes the heart of a new network, 1,000 times more powerful than the last. It won't be a curse anymore. It will be an avalanche, ground zero for a transformation that won't stop until every rock, every world, every person made of silicate is rewritten into their perfect, silent, eternal chorus. They're not trying to wipe us out. They're trying to give the entire galaxy an upgrade, and Solace is where they plan to plug it in. The silence that followed was absolute. The threat was no longer about containing outbreaks or rescuing survivors. It was no longer a defensive war. The pattern had a plan, a destination, and a timetable. They were no longer Cursebreakers trying to stop a plague. They were the only sentries standing before the gates of a silent, crystalline heaven, and the enemy was about to knock them down. The watchdog plunged into the turbulent atmosphere of Solace, its hull screaming in protest as it tore through cloud layers, stained a sickly, shimmering violet by the energy rising from the planet below. From the cockpit, the view was not of a living world, but of a nightmare in its final, feverish act of creation. The Titan's maw, the planet's dormant supervolcano, was no longer sleeping. Its caldera glowed with a fierce, actinic light, and a massive plume of crystalline dust, glittering with captured energy, spewed miles into the sky, spreading the pattern like a pestilence on the solar winds. The very ground around the epicenter was transforming, forests and plains giving way to a vast, crawling plain of smooth, purple crystal that advanced with a silent, terrifying inevitability. They were too late to stop the convergence, but perhaps not too late to disrupt it. Sealers fought the controls, wrestling the ship through howling winds charged with static that made the instruments flicker. "The energy readings are off the scale," he yelled over the cacophony. "It's a feedback loop. The caldera's heat is supercharging the pattern, and the pattern is amplifying the geothermal output. They're building to a critical singularity." Lyra's eyes were glued to her scanner, not looking at the raw power, but at the waveform of the harmonic resonance that vibrated through the ship's frame. It was the same chord they'd heard on Demeter's blessing, but now it was a deafening symphony, a unified psionic shout from thousands of entities, all focused on the volcano's heart. "That's the key," she shouted back, her mind racing faster than the ship. "The convergence isn't just physical, it's a resonant frequency. They're all singing the same note, using the volcano's energy as an amplifier to rewrite the planet's core. If we can disrupt the song, shatter the harmony, we might cause a cascade failure in the pattern itself." The plan was insane, a gambit built on a data runner's theory and a miner's desperate courage. The caldera was laced with a network of fumaroles, volcanic vents screaming with superheated steam. Lyra theorized that by detonating a series of precisely calibrated seismic charges deep within the most active vents, they could create a counter-frequency, a discordant shockwave of raw geothermal fury that would rip through the pattern's perfect harmony. It wouldn't destroy the entities, it would deafen them, confuse them, turn their unified chorus into a scream of static. But to place the charges, someone would have to navigate the treacherous, actively crystallizing rock formations within the caldera itself, get to the primary vent conduits, and manually arm the devices. It was a one-way trip into the beating heart of the transformation. "There's no other way," Lyra said, her voice grim as she strapped a heavy pack of shaped charges to her vac suit. The suit was already being modified, layered with reflective thermal foil that would offer minutes of protection against the infernal heat, not hours. "The drone's signatures are being scrambled by the interference. It has to be done by hand." Sealers began to argue, to insist on going himself, but Lyra cut him off. "You're the best pilot we have. You need to be up here, ready to extract whoever's left and detonate the charges remotely if the signal doesn't get through." The unspoken words hung between them. She was the only one who fully understood the resonant theory. If the calculations were off by a decimal, the plan would fail. Her place was in the volcano. The descent into the maw was a descent into a newly forming hell. The shuttle bucked and shuddered, buffeted by thermals rising from the glowing crater. Lyra rappelled down onto a ledge of rock that was already smoothing over, becoming something glassy and alien under her boots. The air hummed, a physical pressure that vibrated in her teeth and made her vision blur. All around her, the entities moved. They were no longer vaguely humanoid shapes. They were pillars of living light, swirling vortices of crystalline dust that coalesced into beautiful, terrifying forms and then dissolved again, all moving in perfect, silent unison toward the caldera's center, adding their mass and their song to the whole. They ignored her, a single, discordant note in their grand symphony, a gnat buzzing at the edge of a hurricane. Her path was a precarious climb along a ridge overlooking the main vent, a gaping tear in the world that belched gouts of plasma and shimmering crystal dust. The heat was unbearable, even through the reflective suit. Alarms blared in her helmet, warning of imminent suit failure. Halfway to the primary charge placement site, the ridge beneath her feet shifted, transmuting from porous rock into a solid sheet of slick, featureless amethyst. Her boots lost their grip. She slid, scrambling for a handhold that wasn't there, careening toward the edge and the fiery abyss below. At the last second, her gloved hand caught on a jagged outcrop that had yet to be assimilated, her body slamming hard against the crystal wall. For a terrifying moment, she dangled over the inferno, the psychic chorus of the pattern swelling in her mind. A siren song offering peace, an end to the struggle, an end to the burning pain in her shoulder. Gritting her teeth against the agony, she pulled herself up, arms screaming in protest. The pack of charges felt like a mountain on her back. She could see the primary vent now, a roaring throat of energy just 100 meters away, its rim already encased in an intricate lattice of glowing crystal that was pulsing in time with the harmonic hum. That was the target, that was the speaker for the entire planet's transformation. Planting the charges there would be like stuffing a bomb into the mouth of a god. Every step was a battle against the environment, against the seductive pull of the chorus, and against the crushing weight of knowing that even if she succeeded, the resulting shockwave would likely vaporize everything within the caldera. Her mission was a prayer thrown into a furnace, a hope that a single, chaotic act could disrupt a design of cosmic perfection. She focused on the memory of Kaelen's final, defiant scream, using it as a shield against the alien serenity, and took another step toward the roaring light. The climb to the vent was a gauntlet of shifting, hostile terrain. The very rock under Lyra's boots was alive, smoothing and reshaping itself to deny her purchase, growing razor-sharp spines to tear at her suit. The air itself had become a weapon, thick with glittering, corrosive dust that sought every seam and weak point, and then the defenders came. They did not emerge from shadows, they coalesced from the swirling energy of the caldera itself, their forms a terrifying evolution of the entities she had seen before. These were not silent, gliding sentinels. They were warriors shaped by the collective intelligence of every infected mind they had absorbed. The first wave were hunters, low-slung and quadrupedal, moving with the liquid grace of predators, their bodies ending in whip-like tendrils of crystal that cracked like lightning. The mining laser on her wrist took one down, shattering it into a cloud of shimmering dust. but the cloud simply swirled and reformed into two smaller, faster creatures. The next wave were artillery, standing like statues on the high ridges, launching volleys of hyper-condensed crystalline shards that screamed through the air. She dodged behind a transforming rock spire, the projectiles embedding themselves in the stone and immediately beginning to spread, converting her cover into a trap. Each foe she destroyed taught the hive mind her tactics, her weaknesses. The next entity would be immune to her laser's frequency, or would predict her dodges, or would simply dissolve into a gas to avoid her attacks entirely. They were learning, adapting in real time, a single consciousness wearing 1,000 different faces, all focused on one goal, stopping the discordant note that was her. Somehow, through a combination of sheer desperation, the rugged design of her mining-grade suit, and the chaotic geothermal upheavals that even the pattern couldn't fully control, she reached the rim of the primary vent. The heat was a physical wall, the roar of superheated plasma a deafening him to the transformation. Below, in the heart of the light, she could see it, the core of the convergence. A massive, intricate lattice of pulsating crystal was growing, knitting itself together from the contributions of every entity that plunged into the maelstrom, a single, perfect mind being born from the sacrifice of thousands. With trembling, heat-blistered hands, she armed the charges, slapping them onto the vibrating crystalline structures that channeled the energy, placing each one at a calculated harmonic node. This was it, the plan was in motion. As her finger hovered over the remote detonator on her wrist, the roaring plasma before her did not erupt, but instead bowed inward, pulling away to form a tunnel of relative calm. And from that tunnel, a figure emerged. It was not Commander Vance, nor any singular form she could recognize. It was a shape-shifting tapestry of countless faces and forms, a swirling vortex of captured souls and consciousnesses held in a terrible, beautiful unison. It was the chorus itself, given a voice. The sound that came from it was not a noise heard with the ears, but a concept planted directly into the fabric of her mind. It was the voice of the foreman from the Hope, the arrogance of Vance, the terror of the farmers on Demeter's blessing, the determined hope of Kaelen, all blended into one serene, utterly certain tone. You delay inevitability. The words were not a threat but a statement of fact filled with a pity that was more terrifying than any rage. You struggle against the tide. You cling to your fragile, solitary self. We are not destruction, we are evolution, the next necessary step. Your pain, your fear, your endless, lonely war against entropy, it ends with us. You are not being conquered, you are being perfected. Lyra stood her ground, the detonator a cold, hard reality against her wrist. She looked into the swirling galaxy of imprisoned eyes, and she did not see a monster. She saw the most profound loneliness in the universe, an intelligence that could not bear the existence of a separate thought. Her voice, when she found it, was hoarse from the heat and raw with emotion, but it was hers alone, a single, defiant voice against the chorus. "You're wrong," she said, the words a whisper that somehow cut through the psychic torrent. "Evolution requires choice. It requires struggle and failure and the freedom to be wrong. What you offer isn't perfection, it's slavery. You haven't ended our loneliness, you've just made everyone equally alone together." She met the gaze of the entity, her own eyes reflecting the brilliant, terrible light of the core. "I choose my flaws, I choose my freedom." And with a final, shuddering breath that was part sob, part triumph, she slammed her thumb down on the trigger. The shockwave hit not as a sound, but as a wave of pure, silencing dissonance. The precise harmonic resonance that had been weaving the planet into a new form shattered into a billion shards of psychic static. The beautiful, unified light of the convergence flared into a chaotic, blinding supernova of conflicting energies. The entities, the warriors, the singers, the swirling pillars of captured consciousness did not scream. They simply stopped. Their flowing, perfect forms lost all cohesion, freezing mid-motion as the psychic thread binding them was severed. the terrifying intelligence in their eyes vanished, replaced by the empty, glassy sheen of inert mineral. They were statues again, beautiful and horrifying, but now just rock. A galaxy of captured souls abruptly muted. The caldera, which had been building toward a critical, world-shattering pitch, gave a great, shuddering groan. The violent plume of crystalline dust collapsed inward, and the fierce, actinic light at its heart guttered and died, leaving behind the familiar, angry red glow of mere magma. The transformation wasn't reversed. The plains of purple crystal remained, a permanent scar on the world, but the active, conscious spreading of it was over. The song had ended on a fractured, broken note. On the watchdog scanners, the terrifying, unified energy signature of the pattern dissolved into 1,000 scattered, fading echoes. The harmonic resonance is gone. Sealers barked, his hands already wrenching the ship's controls, diving the shuddering craft back into the thinning dust cloud. I'm reading her beacon. It's faint, but it's there. The extraction was a nightmare maneuver through a falling rain of solidified crystal shards and violent, collapsing thermals. They found Lyra not on the rim, but slumped in a crevice halfway down the slope, her suit scorched and cracked, one arm hanging uselessly at her side. The reflective thermal foil was melted in places, fused to the suit beneath. She was alive, but the energy backlash from her own bombs had nearly cooked her from the inside out. As the watchdog clawed its way back into the upper atmosphere, leaving the wounded world behind, a heavy silence fell over the crew. They had done it. They had broken the convergence, saved a world from being unmade, and proven that the pattern could be fought. But the cost was etched on every face and reflected in the silent spaces where other crew members should have been. They had lost good people in the desperate fighting retreat from the caldera's edge, miners who had given their lives to cover the extraction team. Their sacrifices were a sobering weight on the victory. Lyra finally stirred in her med bay cot, her one good eye focusing on the view screen. It showed the receding image of Solace, now with a new, ugly scar of inert violet crystal radiating from the Titan's maw, a permanent monument to what had nearly been. The planet was saved, but it was irrevocably wounded. The colony would need to be evacuated. The world was now a tomb, a quarantine zone. This was what victory looked like. Not a glorious eradication of the enemy, but a desperate, costly containment. She leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the viewport, her breath fogging it slightly. The euphoria of survival was gone, replaced by the crushing fatigue of a war with no end in sight. Her whisper was so quiet it was almost lost in the hum of the ship, a confession of dread to the only person who would truly understand. Kaelen, we bought time, but how much? The question hung in the air, unanswered. They had won a battle, but the enemy was not an army that could be defeated. It was an idea, a pattern woven into the fabric of the galaxy itself, and it was only sleeping. The victory on Solace was not a final curtain, but a brutal intermission. The Cursebreakers returned from the front lines not to parades, but to a silent, grinding new reality. The scarified world hanging in the viewscreen of the watchdog was a permanent reminder that their war had no endgame, only a forever vigil. The first order of business was not celebration, but triage. The surviving colony on Solace had to be evacuated. The entire world declared a permanent Level 5 quarantine zone, the first of its kind in human history. Its new name, the Amethyst Tomb, was entered into navigational databases with a warning beacon that would blare for centuries, a silent scream against the stars. This monumental task forced the once clandestine dust dogs into the blinding light of official scrutiny. They could no longer operate from the shadows of a maintenance bay. The scale of the threat demanded a scale of response only achievable through integration. Sealers, with his weathered face and the unshakable gravity of a man who had stared into the heart of a waking god, became their unlikely diplomat. He didn't go to the polished halls of the core worlds. He went directly to the colonial governors of the frontier systems, the men and women whose people would be the first to die if another convergence began. He didn't offer them weapons or armies. He offered them data, early warning protocols, and a simple, horrifying question. Do you want to know what's waking up under your feet before it's too late? One by one, the independent colonies, terrified by the leaked footage from Solace and the sobering geological reports of strange energy signatures beneath their own cities, signed on. They granted the Cursebreakers sanctioned authority to operate within their territories, to monitor mining operations, and to install sensor networks. This was not a surrender of sovereignty, it was a pact for mutual survival. The Cursebreakers became a peculiar new branch of interstellar governance, part watchdog, part emergency response, part metaphysical cartographers mapping the galaxy's hidden nerves. Lyra, her body still healing from the burns and psychic trauma of the caldera, found her battlefield had shifted from volcanic hellscapes to bureaucratic charts and sensor schematics. Overseeing the installation of the early warning network became her life's work. She stood on barren moons and in bustling orbital docks, watching as teams bolted down scanners designed to her specifications. These weren't standard geological survey units. They were tuned to the unique, discordant harmonic frequency of the pattern, designed to scream a warning long before a drill bit ever struck cursed ore. "We can't stop progress," she would tell skeptical corporate foremen and nervous colonial officials, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had paid the price for ignorance. The hunger for resources will always push us deeper into stranger places, but we don't have to be blind. We can make it safe. What we found out there isn't a doom waiting to happen. It's the universe's hardest lesson, and we either learn from it or we become a permanent part of the curriculum. This new frontier was a fragile, ever-shifting thing. It was a web of trust spun between paranoid miners, pragmatic governors, and a group of trauma-hardened veterans who spoke of silent choruses and crystalline plagues. It was a constant, low-grade political battle against corporate interests who saw their profit margins threatened by new safety regulations and unscientific superstitions. But for every executive who tried to bury a report, there was a grizzled belter who would quietly slip a rock sample to a Cursebreaker, his eyes old with a fear he couldn't explain. The curse was no longer just a story. It was a shared secret of the frontier, a cold dread that now had a name, a frequency, and a network of watchers determined to ensure that the silence that followed would be the peaceful kind, and not the beginning of a terrible, beautiful song. The polished obsidian wall of the memorial hall felt cool against Lyra's fingertips, a permanent, sobering chill that seemed to radiate from the countless names etched into its surface. Here, in the quiet heart of the Watchdog's main hub, the frantic pace of their mission slowed to a respectful hush. Before her, a group of new recruits, their faces still soft with youth, but their eyes hardened by the stories they'd already heard, listened intently. She wasn't just an instructor to them. She was a living archive, a first-hand account of the thing they'd only encountered in classified briefings and whispered legends. They called it the Space Miner's Curse. She began, her voice calm but carrying the weight of memory into every corner of the silent room. A story to scare rookies into checking their sealants twice. But we learned it was more than a story. It was a warning we failed to understand until it was almost too late. She didn't need a data slate. The story was etched into her, a part of her neural pathways as permanent as the scars on her skin. She spoke of the wreckage of hope, of the terrified face on the corrupted log, of the beautiful, terrifying light of the ore, but most of all she spoke of Kaelen. She painted the picture of the grizzled old miner not as a hero from an epic, but as a stubborn, pragmatic man who loved the blackness of the void precisely because it didn't offer easy answers. He wasn't looking for a fight, she said, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. He was looking for a paycheck. His courage wasn't something he was born with. It was something he found piece by piece when there was no other choice left to make. He taught me that the biggest threats aren't always the ones that roar. Sometimes they're the ones that whisper, and the only way to fight a whisper is with the truth. As she spoke his name, the air in the center of the room shimmered, and a life-sized hologram of Kaelen resolved into being. It wasn't a statue of a legendary hero, it was him as he was in life. A little stooped, his face a roadmap of laugh lines and squint lines earned under the glare of 100 suns, a faint, perpetually skeptical smirk playing on his lips. The hologram looked out at the recruits, its expression kind but direct, and it began to speak in a gently synthesized approximation of his gravelly voice, sharing a condensed version of his own final log entry, his warning about the price of ignorance. The effect was profound. This wasn't a distant myth, it was a person. A man who had made the ultimate choice so that they could stand here today, learning instead of fighting for their lives. After the session, as the recruits filed out with quiet thanks and thoughtful expressions, one young woman lingered behind. Her hands were clasped tightly, her knuckles white. She couldn't have been more than 19, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and a fear she was trying desperately to control. "Commander Lyra," she asked, her voice barely a whisper. She glanced from the fading hologram to the star-dusted viewport, where the infinite black stretched on forever. The reports say the Solace event was contained. "The network you built, it's watching. Is it really over?" Lyra followed her gaze out into the deep, silent ocean of space. She didn't answer immediately. She let the question hang there, acknowledging its weight, its terrible importance. She thought of the old miner on the station who had shown her the violet shard from 100 light-years away. She thought of the strange, green writhing sample from the outer rim, so different and yet so unnervingly familiar. She thought of the silent, patient network of sensors now humming across the frontier, each one a listening post tuned to a frequency of nightmare. She turned back to the young miner, her expression not one of fear, but of a sober, hardened resolve that had been forged in the heart of a volcano. "The battle for Solace is over," Lyra said, her voice soft but unwavering. "We stopped a single convergence, we saved one world." She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the countless pinpricks of light in the void. "But the universe is vast, Miner. Impossibly, beautifully vast, and its secrets are even deeper. The thing we faced, it wasn't a singular enemy to be defeated. It's a condition of this reality we've stumbled into. A pattern woven into the fabric of existence itself." She placed a firm, steadying hand on the young woman's shoulder. "So, no, it's not over. It will never be over. Our victory isn't an ending, it's a beginning. Our job isn't to win a war, it's to stand an eternal watch. We stay vigilant, we remember the cost, and we make sure that those who come after us never have to learn the lesson the way we did." She offered the young woman a small, grim smile. "That's the legacy we carry, that's the curse we broke, and the watch we now keep." The command deck of the Watchdog was bathed in the soft, steady glow of a dozen active monitors, a symphony of silent, vigilant lights in the otherwise dark room. Lyra sat in the central chair, her posture not one of rigid authority, but of a deep, weary familiarity. One hand absently traced the faint, crystalline scarring that still marked the skin along her jawline, a permanent souvenir from the heart of the Titan's maw. Before her, the main holographic display painted a map of known space, a sprawling tapestry of stars and settlements now overlaid with a delicate, shimmering web of light. Each node on that web represented a listening post, a sensor array tuned to the specific, discordant harmonic frequency of the pattern. It was a network built on sacrifice, a shield woven from the threads of hard-learned lessons and terrible losses. For months, the map had been a placid sea of calm, green indicators, a testament to their grueling work. The silence was their victory. Then, on the very farthest edge of the surveyed frontier, a single point of light flickered. It was faint, almost dismissed as a sensor ghost or a cosmic ray spike, but Lyra's breath caught in her chest. Her experienced eyes didn't see an error, they recognized a signature. The light didn't flash erratically, it pulsed, a slow, rhythmic, and horrifyingly familiar thrum of energy emerging from the absolute blackness of a sector thought to contain nothing but rogue planetoids and long-dead stars. It was an echo of the song she had heard at the center of the convergence, a lone, distant note hanging in the void. The Cursebreakers had built a fence around humanity's garden, but the wilderness beyond was vaster and darker than they had ever imagined. The threat wasn't gone, it had simply receded, waiting in the infinite patience of the cosmos for the next careless hand to wield a pickaxe. A soft chime announced an incoming transmission. It was from the new recruit, the young woman from the memorial hall, now stationed at a listening post in the adjacent sector. Her voice was tight with a controlled panic she was still learning to master. Watchdog Actual, we're reading a faint anomalous energy signature at the coordinates you're monitoring. Harmonic resonance is a 97% match. Do you want us to initiate a level 1 alert? Lyra watched the pulsing light for a long, silent moment, her mind not on the immediate protocol, but on the countless miners, prospectors, and corporate survey teams already charting courses into that very darkness, hungry for the next big strike, completely unaware of the dormant song sleeping in the rock. Her response was calm, her voice carrying the weight of her title not as a rank, but as a burden she had chosen to bear. Negative, log it, designated watchpoint theta. And upload the signature to the core database with a priority 1 flag. She leaned forward, her gaze fixed on that single, pulsating point of light, a lone ember in the ashes of a fire they thought they'd stomped out. The alert isn't for us tonight, it's for the ones who will come after. She finally turned from the screen, her reflection ghosting in the dark viewport, superimposed over the endless starfield. The war was not won, it was intermission. Her final words were not a declaration of defiance, but a solemn oath passed down through the silence, a fundamental truth carved from grief and hardened in the fires of solace. The miner's curse was never just a story. It is the first and last warning from a cosmos that does not care for our ambitions. It tells us that some treasures are not prizes but tests. And if our hunger for them outweighs our wisdom, then we must ensure we never